like to announce this and let them know about it.
Or I
Mine on the shelf. Yeah, unless you're really. Because it is next weekend. Oh, election year.
Nothing like a cold sandwich up there.
Yeah.
Right in there 20 minutes ago.
This thing here is taking its time. Must be chilly too.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't want to get sued like the old
Well, you're gonna have to sit on the end or something, buddy.
Nope. I went through between my legs. Didn't matter what you say.
This is that event I was talking to Devin about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, one of the speakers might be a bit of a quack talk, but,
Jojo,
you know, at least for the
you go
cause.
ahead, sis.
I don't know if you want to read the announcement.
It's time to eat.
And if people want to go,
Or do you want
I can.
It's time to sit.
Yes, sir.
I need to ask you a question, maybe a question, Matthew, 25:41.
I'm quiet.
Does that imply, does it imply
Matthew 25.
25:41?
All right.
Does that imply a lack of foreknowledge on God's part regarding our, a lot of people's just final destinations?
25. All right, Matthew chapter 25,
25:41.
41. All right, that's where he's talking about the nations, or I'm sorry, the nations, yeah, different ones here. Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. And the reason was because they didn't minister to these that he mentioned.
So my question is, the part you cursed with everlasting fire. So if that everlasting fire was prepared for the devil and his angels, did God have foreknowledge that he would be sending human souls there?
Well, God, because he knows the past and the future and at all times, he would have known that. But probably what likely is going on here is the lake of fire was prepared when the devil and his angels rebelled against God, which would have been prior to Adam and Eve's disobedience to God. So the lake of fire would have been something that God foreknew in that he, understood all the ramifications of what could take place. And this is something that's hard for our finite brains to wrap around, because God knows every possible future that could take place, but then he also knows which ones will take place. And because of the devil's rebellion, he would have created the lake of fire probably right then because and also we know that some angels were placed in hell, which is of course separate from the lake of fire. But we know that he had to do something when sin entered into his creation. So the Bible doesn't really tell us explicitly when the lake of fire was created, but this implies that it was created because of the devil and the angels that followed him in rebellion against God. So then when mankind rebelled against God, then it became the destination for, the rebellious man as well.
You would think he would have said, prepared for the devil and his angels.
Well, they could have put it that way, but if we look at it this way, it's saying that hell was initially prepared for fallen angels. And since man decided to put his allegiance with fallen angels rather than with God, then he gets to go where the fallen angels are going to go, rather than where God is. So, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of another, I guess you could say, in terms of what it indicates there.
Yeah, in my mind, when I first read it, and it still kind of sticks with that, it implies that God does not have foreknowledge about throwing man into the same location.
Yeah. Well, see, I look at it this way. We don't let unclear verses reinterpret clear things. And the Bible is pretty clear on the omniscience of God, the all-knowing nature of God. So I would approach it from the standpoint that if God knows everything, then how would this fit into that rather than the other way around? So I'm it's kind of the way you're hitting it. It's like in the American legal system, supposedly at least, you're supposedly presumed innocent until they can prove you're guilty. But in other, supposedly, but in other countries, they presume you're guilty until you can prove you're innocent. So both of them are coming at the same problem. Is the person guilty or not, or did the person do the crime or not? But one's coming from the standpoint, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, we'll assume that they're innocent unless there's reason to believe they're guilty. The other ones say, no, we're not giving them the benefit of the doubt, we're going to think the worst of them. They're guilty unless they can prove they're innocent. And so, in a sense, approaching passages in the scripture such as this, the question then becomes, do we give God the benefit of the doubt and say, God is who he says he is? And so therefore, how would this verse fit into that? Or does this verse mean God isn't who he says he is? I don't know if that's clear exactly what I'm saying, but we're still approaching the thing, what does the verse mean and how does it fit into whether or not God knows everything? But I guess it's just a different way of approaching it. I'm approaching it from the standpoint that if this is true, then this verse that's kind of confusing, how would it fit with this true statement that God knows everything? So that's my default position.
Does it apply to maybe before man was even created?
Well, and see, that's what I was saying. The idea that the devil and the fallen angels, they rebelled against God prior to Adam and Eve disobeying God.
That's how
Because for one thing, the devil was participant in that,
That's how I
instigator. Yeah, so when the lake of fire was created, had to have been after the creation of the heavens and the earth, because God said everything was good. So lake of fire must have been created later. How much later? Probably not much later, because we don't know how long Adam and Eve were in the garden until the devil tempted Eve at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And likewise, we don't know how long that Lucifer served in his position before being lifted up with pride. And then, of course, when you're looking at the spiritual realm, time in the spiritual realm is not the same as time in our realm, because the Bible says 1,000 years in heaven is like a day on earth, or a day is like 1,000 years on earth. Which means time is meaningless in heaven from our standpoint. I've known some people before who actually their theory is that there is no time in heaven. Time is a function of the universe, space and time. Time is kind of where you hang the dimension coordinates on, because where each of us is sitting is a three-dimensional location in space, but other people may have been occupying that exact space at another time. So you have to have a time function as well.
Our knowledge only expounds to a finite type of
Exactly.
ending.
Yeah. Right. So some of these things like this, I call them before spiritual speed bumps. You're reading along and you hit that and you go, whoa, what was that? And you stop and think, and you start asking questions. A lot of people read over these things and they never stop and think about it, because they're just zipping through and they don't bother to think. So that's where it's good when we bring these things up, because we look at them, because, yeah, it's time where you have to stop and think, well, why would God have said that? Why didn't he say for the devil and his angels and fallen man? You know, why didn't he specifically say that? And,
Yeah, that was like the week we had the predestination versus, salvation through Christ through faith, and if everyone was predestined, remember we brought that up the one week? Yeah, that was another controversial, but we went through that really well, and, we had, really good discussion about that.
You mentioned time.
No, I'm just saying, we can never understand everything about God, that's what.
there's always gonna be something that we can find. It seems like no matter how many times you go through the Bible, you always find something.
You mentioned time, and what comes to mind, I've always imagined change of life, where we live in a life with no time. And that would be a big painting on a big wall of everything happening at once, everything that's ever happened at once.
And that, I mean, it's hard for us to wrap our mind around that. Maybe here's an illustration. Online, they have these animations. You know, we've all seen the pictures of like the planets going around the sun, and you just think of them going in these circles around the sun, just like that. Here's the sun, and here's everything going around it. But they point out in, go over to Psalm 19 for just a minute. In this one. In Psalm 19, it says, starting in verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. And then at the end of verse 4, it says, in them he hath set a tabernacle for the sun, which continues into verse 5, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there's nothing hid from the heat thereof. So it's talking about how God's creation shows there is a creator. And this bit about the sun, we know the sun has a tabernacle, it has a dwelling place. It dwells specifically at the center of the solar system. It's not out by Pluto. You know, it's at the center of the solar system. And not only that, it's in a spiral arm in the Milky Way galaxy. It's not in Andromeda. It's not in some other, it's in the Milky Way galaxy in a spiral arm, not in the center. It's out in a spiral arm. Well, we know that the sun, because it's in a spiral arm of
What's the spiral?
spiral, like spinning, you know, you get a spiral shape.
Right,
If something spins, you know, like if
but
you,
it's not the center of the center of the Milky Way is what
no,
you're saying?
no, it's not the center of the Milky Way. No, if we were at the center of the Milky Way, there'd be no night. Too many stars too close to us, it'd just be blinding light. Actually, they theorize that there's a large black hole at the center of the Milky Way too.
The radiation might cook us.
Yeah, the radiation would cook us, all kinds of stuff. But because of where we're at, you know, if you see a spiral shape, like if you have a cup of coffee and you pour a little milk in it and it starts to swirl, and the center turns faster, so you get the little swirls out around the side. Well, that's what a spiral arm of the Milky Way is, because the center is moving faster, we're a little slower, but the whole thing is revolving, and the sun is going from one end of the heavens to the other at a rapid rate, like a strong man to run a race, because there's other suns going, and they're going at different speeds, and we're racing around the center. Where the sun's going at about 143 miles per second as it goes around the Milky Way galaxy, okay? Now, even though that's fast, we're not gonna get around it in our lifetime, obviously. But so here's the picture. We picture the sun with this. But in reality, we're going around the sun as the sun's going like this. So if you, like you said with your painting, have a picture and draw that spiral, the Earth's orbit isn't this, it's this. It's a long, like a spring, like you have a coiled up spring. That's what it is, as it's following the sun. So, you know, by looking at the time factor, we see the Earth's orbit's like this, not like this. Because the sun isn't staying here like this, it's going like this. So we're going with it.
The galaxy's traveling.
And the galaxy itself is traveling around. There's a cluster. There's a picture of the spiral arms. See? And we're out on one of them. And when you look up in the sky in an area where it's dark and you see the Milky Way, you see, because we're looking in on the edge of that disk. And so you can see this broad band. You know, when I was a kid living here in Richfield, you could actually see it. You can't now. It's too much light pollution. When we were in the Samoan Islands, it was great. We'd go out at night, you know, and it'd just be like somebody took a paintbrush and went with white paint across the line in the sky. So if you've ever been, of course, these guys in the Navy, when you're out at sea sometimes, right, you got areas where, you know, you're just looking up and you see everything in the sky. So you put that time factor in there, it looks different. But heaven's almost like an eternal now. So when we get to heaven, we'll see people who went on before us. They might have went on before us years ago, and when we get there and say, "Man, it's been years since I saw you," they're like, "What? I just got here." They're not going to be as conscious of time passing in the sense that we are. So I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting when we get there. I'm certainly looking forward to that, hoping that from our perspective, it's sooner than later. So, but yeah, time gives us something to hang the other three-dimensional coordinates on. So
The verse you was talking about, would it be that God, you know, the statement about for the devil and his angels, that's what God preferred, or that's what God's choice would have been. He really did not want man to fall and end up there.
no, I never wanted. He didn't even want to have to create it for the devil and his angels either. But nonetheless, there had to be something, some place to put them, in a sense, to isolate sin from the rest of God's creation. So, yeah. So, but that is an interesting, when you think about it, you start to think about all these larger picture things. It's kind of interesting. It's a good question. So, talking about that made me think, has anybody noticed all of the UFO stories in the news lately?
Distractions.
But why all of a sudden, you know, Kim and I were talking about this. This is my thought. The devil knows that the Lord's return is near. He knows that the rapture can take place soon. One of the things that's been floated for a long time, I remember reading about it in the 70s, maybe UFOs will land and say that they did this or took some people away. This is something that's been out there for a long time. So the devil here's things the devil doesn't know. The devil doesn't know when the rapture is going to take place. The devil doesn't know exactly what's going to be going on in the world when the rapture takes place. Now, if there was a large electromagnetic pulse attack or something on the United States and everything was in vast confusion and nobody knew anything more than what you could find out from the people you're talking to, because there's no internet, there's no radio, there's no television, there's nothing. No newspapers, nothing. No telephone. You wouldn't know what was going on to need much of an explanation. But what about other parts of the world that might not be affected? See, the devil got to come up and put things in place. It's just like we were talking a little bit about the vaccines and the mask wearing and how the world is being conditioned. See, I personally don't think that the coronavirus and the vaccine is the in play. I think it is the dry run. This was all, still think was to be rolled out last summer. It accidentally got out. Oh, if I see the news, they're now admitting that there was a top secret thing by Lawrence Livermore, their biotech research thing, did a study that they released about a year ago saying that President Trump was correct, that it may very well have come from a lab in Wuhan. Surprise, surprise. Remember how he was ridiculed? And if you were one of the people who said that was what likely happened, you were ridiculed too. So where's the apologies from the media? Ridiculing President Trump and ridiculing those of us that agreed that it came out of a lab in Wuhan. Well, now all of a sudden they're entertaining that thought. But all these, see, again, there were all of those global reset things. There's things that the Pope was doing. Reminder, there's a, we'll get to that announcement there. But there's also I watched a webinar online the other day, and it was regarding the Francis Vatican. That's how they called it, Pope Francis. And they were showing in this webinar the depth at which the Vatican under Pope Francis is thoroughly not enmeshed in the New World Order and the Great Reset, but actually one of the prime movers and shakers in the world of the Great Reset and the New World Order. The Pope is scheduling all kinds of things. This woman went there for a supposed conference on human trafficking, international human trafficking. And when she got there, she found out that it was almost anything but. It was a big globalist, elitist seminar trying to get everybody pulled in. And so she did a bunch of investigations, and being Catholic herself, she had a vested interest in it. And so she really went into the globalist activities of the current Vatican resident, I guess we could call him. So, but what I'm getting at is these things are pulling together right now more than at any other time. So the devil's trying to get things ready. Here's another good one. The leader of Turkey, Erdogan, had a call with Putin in Russia. Now, according to the Jerusalem Post, what they said was they were discussing cooperating on an international peacekeeping force that would go into Israel and restore the peace. Anybody think of anything in the Bible that talks about Turkey and Russia allying to go into Israel? I'll say Ezekiel 38 maybe? Yeah. Well, other sources suggest that it was more than just forming an international peacekeeping group, but it was more along the lines of Turkey is telling Russia, we need to go in and teach Israel a lesson.
Yeah.
But all these things are lining up like never before. So we've had this thing where they found that by making people think that they're going to get sick from something that's not really much worse than the flu, and everybody's going to die like they did in the flu epidemic, the Spanish flu epidemic in 1917, by making everybody think that, or 1918, and then by just throwing a few booga-boogas out there, everybody will hide in their homes and put a cloth over their face, and you can identify all the radicals because they're the ones that'll not go out with a face mask, or those that won't listen or won't believe it. So you bring all the radical element out to where you identify them so they can be taken away for the benefit of the society. To a re-education camp or something for their own benefit.
Sometimes it goes, sometimes it pops in the back of my mind, if it were possible. If this is possible. What would happen if God forgot to tell Jesus when the rapture was to occur? And would that legitimize people predicting when he's going to come?
But of course, in his incarnation, he took limitations on himself, and that was one of the limitations. But you were gonna say something too.
Do you think the story is, the story will be, well, after that terrible war, we had, the aliens came down and took away all those troublemakers who were in the way of entering the age of Aquarius, whatever that nonsense.
And that's what's been floated since, I've been reading that since the 1970s. Whether it was people who were in deep meditation that met with galactic spirit beings that were overseeing the spiritual evolution of humanity, or whether it was visitors from far, far away coming in to welcome Earth as we reach the space age into the galactic fellowship of beings. But first we got, this is what's common with all of them, but first we got to get rid of those backward ones that are holding you back. Look around the room. You're seeing the backward ones that are holding you back. And this UFO stuff, I was in the Air Force. Without revealing things, I can tell you military's had evidence. But so they're now bringing all this out to where the military now is releasing everything. And they're putting this out for a reason. And it may be that the devil is going to use that. And one thing I wanted to mention before we get too far afield, you had that thing about in Columbus here a little bit. You want to announce that?
I know we've been talking about the critical race theory and the 1619 Project and the comprehensive sex education and the freaks pretending to be girls, demanding to play in girls' sports and everything. There's going to be a rally at the State House called the Save Our Children Rally. Now, I know of some of the speakers, not all the speakers, probably not A-list people, but if you want to go there to be another body in a crowd to show our state legislatures, listen, we're paying attention, because right now there are multiple bills that could determine the future of Ohio schools. If the Lord does tarry, we can plug a few holes in the ship and they can sink a little bit slower if we prevent, if we do a little bit to prevent the further indoctrination of a few of our Ohio kids. So, anyone, I'll pass this around. If you're interested, if you're coming from this area and you're interested, if you would like to, park and walk to the State House together, we could do that if you'd like. But I'll pass this around next Saturday, though. That's why I'm announcing that it's on the 5th.
So a week from tomorrow.
Pass it around. You can take a picture up with your phone, whatever. That is on the Free Ohio Now website on the event calendar. There's a whole bunch of other events on there now. I just can't keep them all straight, so that's the one I'm focusing on.
You supply the wheelchairs for those?
I don't have a wheelchair. I had a power wheelchair, but it would take some work to get it running.
But let's see, what else do we have going on?
Did you see in the paper that the World Institute of Health, only half of that organization has taken the vaccine, the other half has not?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big organization.
Because a lot of them realize you don't need it,
Right.
especially if you've had the disease. What do you need the vaccine? I mean, I had chicken pox when I was a kid, so they got a chicken pox vaccine now. I'm not going to take it. Why would I? I had chicken pox. I know some disease like flu or category, family, where there's a lot of variation with chicken pox is pretty much.
Has it been confirmed, because I haven't heard anything on the news in the year and a half that we've had COVID, that once you've had COVID, you won't, you remain immune indefinitely?
Well, there's just not enough time. There hasn't been enough time, so.
There's different variations of it.
Yeah. But
With any virus.
Yeah.
You have variants, so.
And exactly. And plus they do know that worldwide, an incredibly tiny fraction of people who have had the virus have been reinfected. And generally, in virtually all the cases, those who were reinfected, that they know were, the case was much less severe than it was their first time. Which suggests that you have a broader immunity to it. See, when you go back to the origin of vaccines, smallpox, which is virtually eradicated in the world, but it used to plague a lot of people. And they noticed that milkmaids who were milking cows that had a related virus called cowpox, because cowpox, smallpox, chickenpox, sort of name, but cowpox and smallpox are very closely related, be like influenza A and influenza B. That's a little simplified, but they noticed that the reason they realized what was going on is these milkmaids, as they're milking the cows, they didn't have milking machines. It was all by hand. And they didn't have all kinds of lotions to have soft, supple hands. So their hands were chapped. Well, what happens when your hands get chapped and they start to crack? So they had cracks in their skin, and some of the cows that had cowpox, they were getting the cowpox vaccine into their body through the cracks in their skin.
Cowpox virus.
Yeah, what did I say? Cowpox.
Vaccine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, cowpox virus. Sometimes I don't know what I said, but somebody said I got my tongue wrapped around my eye teeth and couldn't see what I was saying. But so they were not getting smallpox, and they did some experimenting. And what they initially started doing was taking from the pox is a little blister-like thing, and the liquid in it has a bunch of the virus. So they were taking the virus, basically. They didn't know it was a virus at the time. They didn't know what it was. This whole idea of germ theory was still germinating, pardon the pun. But they would take that and they would make like a little cut in the skin of somebody, and they would put that in there. And guess what? Oftentimes the person didn't get smallpox. And so they weren't giving a vaccination where they gave you a shot, but what they were doing was making a little cut in the skin and putting that liquid that we now know was filled with cowpox viruses inside of the skin so that it got into your system. And because it was close enough to smallpox virus, the body had a little bit of immunity against smallpox. And so people who had that done got smallpox less, and they further investigated, and that's eventually led to the smallpox vaccine. And when they did that, now they virtually eradicated smallpox from the wild, so to speak. They have it in labs. But that's where, back, if you remember 9/11, 2001, 9/11, they had the worries that they were going to give out smallpox vaccines, and even though you had them, because most of us in the room have the little spot on your arm where you had the smallpox vaccine. They don't give them anymore because it's basically eradicated from the wild. People don't get it because we eradicated it through the smallpox vaccine. Well, they made a big deal about giving a new booster vaccine because they were worried that somebody was going to weaponize smallpox and mix it with something else. They were calling it what, blackpox, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And which would have been worse than smallpox. But the theory was, if you had a smallpox vaccine, just like the exposure to the cowpox virus helped people resist the smallpox virus, by having this improved smallpox vaccine, you would be resistant to a weaponized blackpox. And
Because the black pox was, I think, related to Ebola, it would make you bleed out.
yeah, you would in black because it was collecting blood inside of the little blisters. So that was a big thing. It was kind of interesting. Everybody was worried about it back then. And Kim, in one of her nursing magazines, they were showing the rate of complications from it. It was actually less than what we had with the one that we all had when we were younger. It was a pretty good bit less than that. So it was we had a more, one that had more complications than, because you're always gonna get some people who have complications, something more than others, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up though, like, I've read a lot over the years about vaccines and stuff.
Mhm.
And when I was younger, I used to get them all the time. My mom worked for a medical doctor. I was the sickest kid. I had all the vaccines, right? Then, I haven't had any since 19 or something like that. But the thing is with even a regular vaccine concept, you're putting that virus inside your body. So if your white blood cells can't counteract it, you're gonna die.
Well, and that's why there's always a risk, because some people aren't going to be able to, some people might even have like an allergic reaction. And so the question always is, Kim and Warren actually have to go, so they're not just racing out here. They actually have to go somewhere. But, the idea is, are the number of people at risk from the vaccine greater or lesser than the number of people at risk from the virus? A good example, the measles vaccine. We had all these people dying from measles, and then they instituted the measles vaccine, and the numbers dropped off dramatically. There is a risk. They've known that, a long time. So if the risk is greater than getting the vaccine, why in the world would you get the vaccine? And to me, the risk is greater right now with this vaccine than the disease itself. So why do you want the vaccine? There's no point.
It's important to say too that, we should use the word vaccine, because these aren't really vaccines. These are-
Well, some are, some aren't. The
well,
Pfizer and the Moderna are mRNA things. The Johnson & Johnson is a virus.
It's a DNA. It's
No, the Johnson & Johnson's not the DNA.
No, they actually say, if you go to Johnson Johnson site, they say that they were given the genetic signature from China in January. So there's no way any of these manufacturers could have created a regular vaccine with the iterations that you have to go through to isolate the virus in just months' time. There's a Scientific American study, June 1st,
Yeah, I'll have to read up some more.
and they actually said their headline is genetic engineering to make a COVID-19 vaccine in months rather than years. They mentioned that.
Oh, yeah.
And all of them were right.
Well, but again, I come back to the point, whatever you choose to call it, the risk I think is greater than the disease, so why would you want it?
Then they make it tricky though, they won't let you travel unless you got your card saying you got it.
Well, that's why they're making their bills in various states, and people are trying to get it through in the state and the federal government, but right now in the current regime, to where they can't do that. So, yeah, so, and I certainly wouldn't go for the Russian or the Chinese.
Well, we had 0 deaths of the flu this year, so praise the
Well,
Lord.
I know, because they all reclassified them as, yes.
I think we talked about it before, this week, against the law that stores, the work you go into, they say you can go in, without a mask if you have the vaccine. But if somebody at the door asks you, then you have the vaccine, it's against HIPAA laws.
Yeah.
Now, and that goes up, even though the store says, okay, we're not gonna let you in the store.
Well,
So they could probably keep you in the store.
Yeah, it can be challenged, but the question is, will the court side with you or
I don't
popular?
wanna go to a
pressure.
court, I just wanna get in the store.
It
Yeah,
doesn't
but-
matter how illegal it is,
Yeah.
you're wasting your breath arguing with people. If the guy at the door says, ask everyone this question, and if this answer, throw them out, or you lose your job, it
They'll throw
doesn't
you out.
matter, anything other than a police officer in uniform, standing there ordering him to let you in, which that's not gonna happen, anything short of that is not gonna get you let into the store. Legal or not, you're welcome to try, and I'm all,
But there's a difference though, and I just want to, right now, go into the store without the mask. Go everywhere without the mask.
I
Be sure that's, okay, turn the other cheek, make them step up and ask, because they're not going to, because this one is where you could sue. The masks, they got away with
I
that.
could sue them.
Yeah, because they're asking you about a health, what have you, it'd be like, have you had surgery? They can't do that.
Yeah, if they stood at the door and said, "Do you have an appendix?" If you haven't got an appendix, you can't come in the store. So they're asking you about a surgery. Did you have a surgery? See, the way they get away with it is because most people aren't gonna fight it. And like Zeke pointed out, if the guy's told by his boss, do this or you lose your job. And most people that come in, they'll go, oh, okay. And if you volunteer the information, then it doesn't matter what HIPAA says, if you volunteer it. That's just like when police pick somebody up. If they pick you up and they say, well, let's just talk off the record. There's no off the record. That's just a tactic. And they leave you alone in a room with somebody to talk, and they're recording that because they know when they give you your rights, anything you say can and what will be used against you in a court of law, which means, they give you that, but if you talk, then it doesn't matter what the law says. You have the Fifth Amendment right not to self-incriminate. So you don't have to say anything. For instance, at the legal seminars, Lighthouse Legal Ministries, that we go to every year, they're a ministry out of Lighthouse Baptist Church in Ashtabula, and they're a spinoff of the Christian Law Association. When the Christian Law Association started, they were in Ashtabula. They went down to Florida. Some of them stayed up here, and so that's where their roots are from. But what they said is if something happens and you're asked by the police for a statement, you are to say no comment or no statement. If the media calls, you're to say no comment or no statement. You're not supposed to say anything. And a lot of times people think, well, I just want to be honest. It doesn't matter. You can be as innocent as a newborn lamb. It doesn't matter. You can be as guilty as sin. It doesn't matter. You're supposed to say no comment. The only person you're supposed to say anything to is your attorney because they're bound by attorney-client confidentiality. And so that's when you go to these stores and they say, if they were to say, are you vaccinated? You are under no legal obligation to answer that question. Most people would answer the question.
Just pretend you didn't hear them.
Or you could say no comment, or you could do what I joking, somewhat tongue in cheek said, ask them for a HIPAA release form.
Can you say that's confidential information?
Confidential medical information.
But I just want to reiterate again.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because you're worried about this. Downtown, that's where it's been really aggressive, right? Downtown is where it's been really aggressive. They haven't been since the governor said, hey, I'm changing the thing because if you're vaccinated, we're going into places now, Eric and I down here, like we're going to eat. They don't even ask. They don't even ask because these businesses are not going to put them right for a year, over a year. They didn't want to have trouble with the OIU coming in, Ohio State because of the mask, because they're not forcing it. Why? Because legal reasons. They don't want to. So now they're not gonna ask you, hey, have you had a vaccine? Unless now if the governor does something that might change little things. But right now is a time when we should just be going, walking as normal human beings with the face of God.
And if you walk in a lot of these stores, there's workers without masks on.
Yes.
Not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before that, Giant Eagle was still saying, regardless of what the governor says, because June 2nd, all this stuff's supposed to go away in Ohio. We'll see. And for how long. But Giant Eagle was saying, our policy will be people still have to wear masks to come into Giant Eagle or Get-Go. 1 week, less than a week later, they changed that. And they said that effective this past Monday, was that the 24th or something? Or whatever that was. They said effective on that date, if you've been vaccinated, you may walk into a Giant Eagle or a Get-Go without a mask. Well, I look at it this way, I had COVID, that's the best vaccination you can have. National Institutes of Health actually put a study out just recently that said it's as good or superior to any so-called vaccine. So, I actually printed off some statements where they said that, we mentioned on the radio last Sunday night, and promptly went to the get-go right up here at 84 and 77, and, or 82, what did I say, 84? I'm off on my number. 82 and 71, I'm going the other way now, 82 and 77. There's a guy in there on Sunday nights that we usually comes in, he's all masked up. Anybody that doesn't have one, gotta have a mask on. If it's below your nose, gotta be above your nose. Pull your mask on. And he's got gloves and everything. Now, when we went in there, Lauren and I stopped in there after the radio program Sunday night. We went in, no mask on. We saw a bunch of people. It was the most people that I had seen in there on a Sunday night after midnight in months. And except for one police officer that came in briefly and left with a mask on, nobody was wearing masks. Half of the workers didn't. Well, no, I guess the workers, there was only 3 workers that I saw. They all had masks. One was this guy that was kind of we called him the mask Nazi. But he always seemed to conveniently go on break lately. Lauren and I, because we always come about the same time. And so we hadn't been seeing him too much. Well, he was working at the register, and I had to get some gas. And before we came in, he left. I think, and he went in the restaurant. He stayed in there a long time. And I'm standing in line, Lauren's standing in line, no mask. The lady that's ringing us up at the counter, she's pleasant, not asking anything about masks, not asking anything about vaccinations, not asking anything about anything except, oh, you were in the Air Force? My husband was in the Air Force, and we were talking about that. The guy standing in line behind me and Lauren, no mask, said, oh, Air Force. And we were talking, and a guy behind him had no mask. The guy came out of the bathroom that worked there with his mask on, saw there was 4 people all bunched up together, no social distancing, no mask, and he saw that, and he went and diverted and went the long way around and came up by the back edge of the counter because he had to say something to the woman that was at the register, and the whole time he's masked up and everything like that, and you could tell from his eyes he was not a happy camper. So this tells me they were told not to say anything, because if he could, he would have.
Besides saying, responding with, that's confidential information, I choose to keep it confidential. It seems like you could also say, what was I gonna say? That's, I plead the Fifth Amendment.
That would be one way.
But they have no actual, the Fifth Amendment is for a judicial or
Yeah, I know, but
legislative
still,
authority.
yeah, plead the Fifth.
Yeah, I'm just saying that you have no relationship to the business, right? You don't get no, but, I did wanna mention though that like even, remember some of these stores, for instance, some of these stores were pretty good with no mask anyway. Target was one of the better places where you could just, and I did the last couple months, I was going in without a mask. And there's one time our guy said at the front, like, oh, hey, you gotta put a mask on. And I just kept walking. I had my phone in my hand, like I was busy, which I was, actually. And I just kept walking, and he said something like, yeah, shout, and I'm like, exemption. And then he said to me, what, it's something else, and I just kept walking. I had no problem. I went, did my shopping, checked out. I mean, you gotta just make it seem like if it actually happened, and you don't have your phone where you can record it with them asking you about vaccination, because then you got a lawsuit on your hands. But otherwise, just make it sound like you don't hear.
It was going
Bad
on.
hearing, I can
I
hear.
started.
I'm deaf. Right?
They had a whole list of stores that weren't requiring masks, in Target and Walmart and a number of other ones weren't requiring masks. And this, I read this a week.
But some Walmarts were very adamant on that.
No, a week ago.
You know that, right?
We had mixed
No
results.
mask. And I went to off of South, or whatever 305 is that cheap, but still, wherever. But I asked them on the way in, are you guys still requiring masks? And they said yes, but I just kept walking. the
At the mall.
Walmart on 305.
What's your mall?
Down in Ashland, I don't think I saw one Amish person.
Oh, never have.
It's like,
Never
I'm
have.
Amish, don't bother.
Yeah, the Amish and many of the Mennonites. Yeah, I've seen some Mennonites with masks, but not most of them.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Amish.
According to the
Yeah.
news, Walmart says you don't need a mask anymore.
I-
But when I went there, they said you have to wear it. The person who was working there said, yeah, we're still requiring masks, but I.
There's a difference
I just kept
between,
walking.
there's a difference between the policy that they have to put on the sign outside the front door
Right.
for legal purposes,
Mhm.
and whether they're really gonna aggressively enforce it. Some of these Walmarts aggressively did it, and some didn't. But Targets have been pretty much, I mean, going back months, right? That's, we're not talking about the, are you vaccinated? But they were ready, there were a lot of businesses. And I wasn't as courageous as some of my other patriot brothers and sisters, but I started realizing that, yeah, there was a lot of places you could actually walk into when no one could say anything. There's a lot of people I see online say that they never wore a mask the whole last year.
What about that Walmart in Amish country that you all were standing up for?
Well, that last day that we did it, the third Saturday was the day when Walmart announced, hey, for the fully vaccinated, you can go in. So it essentially
But they're
negated.
not vaccinated, the Amish aren't vaccinated, so they're still letting the Amish go in there.
You're getting, I guess what I'm getting at is like, if you just walk in,
You're gonna ask thousands of people that are walking in your store, every
Yeah.
single one,
Mhm.
are you bad, how are you bad? I mean,
the thing is, you're gonna have people walking into the stores, right, who are fully vaccinated, partially vaccinated, and non-vaccinated. What are you gonna do? You're gonna stop them all? Like you said, you're not gonna do that.
So the Amish are going into that Walmart.
I don't know on that for sure. I would imagine that they could, yeah.
They were standing up for.
Somebody out there is gonna say, I'm a vaccinated winner, didn't they? Somebody get $1 million.
Yeah, somebody did.
1 million, the vaccinated.
But the Amish were claiming a religious exemption, I think, too. But the thing of it is, I think a lot of the stores are realizing it costs them more to insist on somebody wearing a mask that's not wearing one than it's worth.
So at the mall, they're not allowed to ask them.
So, yeah, so they're
Policy
yeah.
policy is you're double vaccinated, optional, wear a mask.
But
You
they
can't
don't,
ask
they're not allowed
if
to
they're,
ask
if they're
them.
vaccinated, so
Exactly.
it's optional.
Well, an interesting thing is the gym that I go to, Planet Fitness, you were required to wear your mask for the first 9 feet of walking in. And that was through the front door and past the front desk, which nobody who worked there cared if you had a mask or not. But from that point on, where you would be breathing the hardest, you didn't have to have a mask. You just only had to have it on for the first 9 feet. And so, and then you're all working out closely at Planet Fitness.
When you're working
Oh, yeah.
out, the hard breathing, you
Is that is just ludicrous.
Nobody has.
I wonder if the other church in town will sing now in church on Sunday rather than Holy Humming.
There's the church that I used to go to last year when they shut down and all that stuff. Not the beautiful church I'm at now, by the way. But I just watched one of their online videos and it was sadly comical because they said, well, this is our first Sunday, we're going to sing. So we'll ask you all to put the masks on, and they just saying they put the mask on. Yeah, it was hilarious. Gateway Church downtown. So, but the point is, there's been variation on implementation, right? Whether it's.
Oh, it's like a mesh, huh? But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Just go in.
What are they gonna do? Ask you and tell you to leave?
And the
And
moment,
realizing what, how ridiculous it is. They'll
Yeah.
get tired of that real fast.
especially making you leave when there's other people walking around without a mask on. It becomes more trouble than it's worth. And that's why, like, again, I said, I'd ask them for a HIPAA release form before I can answer that question, because it is a part of that. In fact, there were some lawsuits, I don't think they ever made it very far, based on the fact that asking people, that requiring a business to tell you to put a mask on to come in is tantamount to telling a business to make you wear a medical device because the masks are classified as medical devices. And how can a business that's not in the medical, how can let's just say for instance, a bakery do medical judgment of you?
So they're practicing medicine without a license.
Exactly. How can they do
insist
that?
you wear a mask.
How can a guy in a bakery shop make a determination, you look like you need a mask. You need a medical device. I mean, at what point do they say, ma'am, you should not come in here unless you have one of those collars on your neck, one of those cervical collars, because, you might have whiplash. Can you give me a certification that you don't have whiplash? You must wear, we have one for you, so you see everybody walking around in the store, with those collars on. Maybe they could just get, like they have for the dogs and cats, the cone of shame, If we think you need one of these, hey, that could have worked instead of the mask. That could have worked instead of the mask, right?
I mean, the mask was.
I'd enjoy filing a legal case to make some money, but the problem is you have to have money to make money.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And a court that'll hear it.
I was gonna say that, the last 4 times I went into the drug mart, which is a mile from my house, on East 200 Street in Newport, I did not wear a mask.
Mhm.
Almost everybody else was wearing a mask. Nobody said anything to me. It was just sort of a fun thing to see if anybody would stop me and I saw all sorts of employees here, and nobody said a word. So that was pretty good. Even though there was a sign on the door.
Employees probably have to wear masks.
The real
keep their jobs. If you ask them for help with something, how far they're
Oh,
gonna
I
stand?
asked people for help. Nobody said.
How far do they stand?
I was at Ace Hardware in Independence today, and all of the employees that I saw, probably half of the employees did not have masks on. And going into Lowe's, going into, there's, probably at least a quarter of the employees at Lowe's did not have masks on.
I can't wait till Wednesday, because I'm always forgetting my mask and having to go back to my car.
The interesting thing is in China, they've been wearing masks for
Yeah.
forever, before any viruses or anything came out. So it'll be.
Japan too, yeah.
It'll be a day as usual for them. They don't care.
I saw a guy jogging with a mask on, and I just don't get it.
Well,
Yeah, it's like, how can you
Pass out.
yeah, when we went to the radio station today, Christopher, Lauren, and I at the radio station, and as we're getting ready to go in, it's pouring down rain. This guy parked on, there's, the parking lot has kind of like levels because it's on the side of a hill. And so the car below us, guy pulled in, alone in his car, windows up because it's raining, got his mask on. So we're all getting out of the car, no mask on. We're walking up there. So he had to come up a little short flight of steps to get up to the level where we were at. And he still got his mask on. And he waited at the bottom of the steps so he wouldn't get close to us unmasked even. And we went into the building, and then after we got in, he finally came up the steps and went in. Well, a little later on, I saw him go out, and still masked up, got into his car, mask and all, and it's like, okay, I can understand some people are, okay, I got somebody in the car with me, but you're in the car by yourself, windows are up. What's the mask for?
You might get too much oxygen otherwise.
Yes, I don't know.
It's actually a good witnessing opportunity, because you can bring about the fear of death. I've actually shared with people that have had the mask and a witnessing opportunity about this, the fear of death. Well, are you afraid of what's gonna happen after you die and why? And, it all can lead right back to the gospel, or it can, make them think.
Exactly. But again, it's been a great time. If you were set something in motion to see what the results would be and how well it would work or what you need to do to improve or tinker with things, you couldn't have designed it better, could you? I mean, except for the fact that I'm still convinced it started too soon. It was because they wouldn't have scheduled all these global reset meetings and everything and then had to cancel them because of everything. They were supposed to have the meetings and then the thing come out and everybody be scared.
Supposed to have the fire drill before you set the building on fire?
Exactly. But somebody pulled the alarm first.
They spilled
I
the
The Lord
gas.
put his finger in there
Carried up
and
the steps.
stirred up the pot so that it kept them off balance. And they had to play catch up and reschedule all their globalist meetings that they were planning before it happened. But no, and they learned a lot from this. They really did. It's just like I can remember when I was in the Air Force, and of course you learn these security procedures, and it's not unique to the Air Force. I'm sure other organizations have had similar things, but one of the things was if anybody ever remembers bomb threats, what do you do? It's like a fire drill, right? You have a bomb threat, so what do you do? Everybody exits the building and you assemble to make sure everybody's out. Here's the problem, and this is the terrorist mindset. You phone in a bomb threat and you watch everybody exits the building, and then the police come, somebody goes in, they do the search and everything. Well, they're not watching that. They're watching, where did everybody go when they left the building? Where did they assemble? And then you make note of that, and then sometime later, you phone in another bomb threat. And you watch to see, do they go to the same place? Do this like maybe 3 times or so, and you notice everybody assembles in that corner of the parking lot. So the next time they phone in the bomb threat, there's a car over in that corner of the parking lot. That's where the bomb is, because that's where the people assemble.
That's where the bigger bomb is.
Well, they don't need to worry about the other place. Their target, they want to sow terror, so they want to kill people. So the bomb is in the car over there where people assemble. And they do this to study the reaction. And I'm convinced that's what's been going on with this. They're studying the reaction of people like us. They're studying the reaction of the people like the guy that was in the car all by himself, all masked up. They're studying the reaction like the guy at Get-Go that's all, yelling at everybody, your mask isn't high enough, pull your mask up and all that. They're watching all of this and they're noting what happens. When have we had the opportunity to see this on such a global scale? I mean, there's countries in the world right now that are still on lockdown.
And when you said they're gathering in one spot, I thought you were getting ready to say they're gonna come in the other way and rob the place because
But they're
nobody's
terrorists,
there.
so, well, robbers could do that, but they're terrorists, they want to sow terror, yeah. And so that was one of the things, the security solution then was, you don't gather in a place where there could be a car bomb or a dumpster or something where they could have it in there. You could gather someplace where, because you have to gather someplace. Otherwise, you wouldn't know who's there and whether everybody got out. And it's kind of hard to say, each week we're going to have a random gathering place. So it's kind of hard to do that. So you don't want to, it's like they talk about a school, they go gather in the bleachers at the football field. Well, something could be underneath the bleachers. I mean, the idea is to sow terror. That's from the terrorist mindset, but go ahead.
I just wanted to, though, we talk about this, and I've seen this in other people, around everywhere too. We need to be really prayerful and still strong in faith and against all this craziness, because it's not necessarily over. Just because we get that June 2nd date, we don't know what's going to happen on June 3rd or June 2nd. And we know they want to push these not vaccines, genetic engineering experts. We know they want to push them. So we
Well, and the social engineering too.
Yeah, social engineering. And, so all these things, and even the global reset.
Mhm.
I mean, our economy hasn't gotten any worse, folks. It's gotten way worse. It hasn't gotten any better. It's gotten way worse. So we're at the precipice of a lot of things that could still go wrong.
Well, inflation, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
It's insane right now.
Mhm. And they're already talking that even though DeWine's saying June 2nd, come this fall, well, cold and flu season and people being indoors, we may have to reinstate things this fall. So they're learning. They're learning, and the globalists are studying this now. And what you know about being prayerful and all, that's the other key too, because we need to realize that God ultimately is in control. And like Jesus said in Luke 21, when you see these things begin to happen, then look up for your redemption draweth nigh. This ought to tell us the Lord's return is near. When we see all this UFO stuff coming out all of a sudden, I'm listening to secular people on the radio and online say, what are they getting us ready for? What's going to happen that they're trying to get the people primed to accept that UFOs are going to land at the White House or something? I don't know, maybe they already have. Maybe that explains a few things.
If the boards would be an improvement over Joe Biden, at least they'd run a more efficient operation.
That's true. That's very true.
Well,
But
that's right, they're trying to
it's-
improve
yeah.
lifestyle.
So we got this. How long did it take to condition people to wear masks? That's the social conditioning that's there. And remember one of the things that they did during the mask thing? If you don't see people wearing masks and social distancing, report them. They were training people. See, again, the whole thing with the vaccines in a sense is almost a distraction. I understand a lot of the principles there, why people are concerned, but it's almost like a distraction because, one of the things that happened when the communists took over in Russia, and then later, the East European nation, behind the Iron Curtain, remember the Stasi in East Germany? They had the populace conditioned to report. Now, there's a big difference between see something, say something, like you see suspicious activity. There's a guy over there who looks like he's putting explosives on the bottom of the bridge. Maybe he looks like he's getting ready to rob the bank, or something. Yeah, report that. That makes sense. That's common sense. But this whole past year, they've been conditioning people to report not people who are committing crimes, but people who aren't being compliant with society's demands. And to me, that's a big difference. And I think that's one of the worst things, because just like that guy at GetGo was, so adamant that the moment you walked in, he's scoping you out. Your mask isn't high enough. You don't have a mask. And he was just, when would you have ever thought that was acceptable behavior? But he thinks it is. He's conditioned. Not everybody is conditioned that way. And by very nature of who we are and what we are, we tend to associate with people who are less conditioned than others. But there's a vast number of people out there that are hook, line, and sinker. When the news is running reports about how to deal with anxiety or going out unmasked and being around people without masks.
It's frightening to see a person without a mask on.
Well, you can carry your mask with you, and if you feel anxious, just put it on. It's okay. Don't let people bully you
It's like your
into
security
not wearing a
blanket.
mask.
You should see everyone saying, online and elsewhere, the virtual signaling mask Nazi Karens that have been, of course, first in line to be vaccinated. They don't know what to do. Do I wear my mask to signal my virtue, or do I not wear my mask to signal that I've been vaccinated? Someone said we should start selling masks that say I've been vaccinated and sell them to all the Karens.
Yeah.
Hey,
Good
why
idea.
don't we do that? We could make some money.
That's the joke.
Yeah.
They're also saying that people, with everything opening up now, that people are partying. What's the old song? Party like it's 1999 or something like that.
Or like it's 2019.
Something like that. They
Party
say
like it's
that they are
2019.
now just going hog wild partying with the amount of divorces that have all happened through the pandemic and that people are just going way overboard than what they normally would do, because it's like a caged animal being let loose.
Like
They're
spring
just
break in college, at a secular college.
committing crimes and the fighting and the things that are happening. It's just, they're saying it's already starting to get just crazy. Not like Antifa, where they kind of had, not sure what their issue was, but
Yeah.
anti-authority.
With all of this, the devil is trying to get people ready to accept the Antichrist.
I
And
believe
to
this
accept
is-
his dictates.
I believe we're in a great falling away.
We're definitely seeing that.
It's just, apostasy's been here for a long time,
And getting worse.
and so, it's.
We went from, what is the statistic, is 70% or more Americans had a membership in a church or synagogue as recently as, what was it, 2015 or something like that. And now it's less than 50%.
Because of the churches
But
closing.
this was 2019 statistics.
It's even worse now.
And it's even worse now. Yeah, because there was a, like Barna or somebody had this. And they said the numbers between like 2000 and 50, it was like in about a 4 or 5 year period of time, we went from 70-some% to less than 50%. So we dropped 20-some percentage points of church or synagogue membership. And since the shutdowns and everything, it's even less than that today. Because everybody's church that shut down and said, well, watch us online, you can just about guarantee not everybody watched them online.
People are fickle because look at what happens towards the end of the millennium.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody gets swayed towards Satan.
Yeah, because in fact, go to that in Revelation chapter 20. In Revelation chapter 20, the devil has been bound in, excuse me, in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. So he's not been out on the world, and it doesn't expressly say it, but you know the implication. You know, it's hard to say, but it may be that the other fallen angels are in prison in the bottomless pit as well. But we know for sure the devil is in prison in the bottomless pit. Jesus is actually physically on earth. People today say, well, how do you know Jesus really exists? Did anybody see him? You can say, well, yeah, let's go to Jerusalem. You can see it. He's there. You can shake his hand. He's there. He will be physically on earth in a physical presence where people will be able to see him during the whole of the millennial kingdom. And you can see him, you can talk to him, you can watch him on the internet or TV or whatever. I mean, he's there. Just like he was when he was here during his earthly ministry. He'll be here, physically present on the earth. And the devil is locked up in the bottomless pit for that whole period of time. And like you brought out, come down to, let's see.
Verse 8.
Yeah. Verse 7. When the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. Boom, it's all over. You know, we had all that stuff dealing with the only frequent church attendees avoided downward mental health trend in 2020. Yeah, we saw something like that last year, that people who are still going to church, mental health was much better. But this passage here, what it's saying is that when the devil comes out of his prison, he'll go out on the earth and he's going to find receptive hearts. And this is because, see, the different groups of people who will be on the earth during the millennial kingdom, we will be there. But and the all the dead that have been resurrected will be there. And we'll all be there in a glorified body. We will all be there with no sin nature. Now, there are some people who are going to come to Christ during the tribulation, and they will physically survive. They won't die. Those people will go into the millennial kingdom in the condition that we are today, in a body with a sin nature. Those people will have children. They've not been changed yet. They're still in their body with a sin nature because they're still inheriting that sin nature through the fathers all the way back to Adam. So those children are going to grow up. They're going to have a sin nature. And you say, well, how could somebody not get saved when Jesus is there? How could they doubt? Well, what about all the Jews that doubted God when he was there manifesting himself every day in a pillar of cloud and every night in a pillar of fire? I mean, they saw the Red Sea part, all that, and they still rejected him. So it's called a sin nature, man's sin nature. So people that go into the millennial kingdom in the state that we are today, in a physical body that still has a sin nature. And they have children, and those children are born with a sin nature. They grow up. They have children who have a sin nature, and they grow up. And it's unfortunately this time. And they have children that have a sin nature. And so on during the whole of the millennial kingdom, you can see, and people living for hundreds of years, you can see where there's going to be a lot of people in the world by the time the 1,000 years is over that are born, that are living in the world with a sin nature, and they're unrepentant. Because they're going to have a moment of repentance, just like we did. When we came to Christ, we had a moment of repentance. We put our faith in Christ as our Savior. We confess that we're sinners lost on our way to hell. And so we experience salvation. These people are also going to have a moment where they're going to come to Christ in repentance. So some of them won't. They might be religious, they might be nice people, but they're not going to be redeemed. And their children aren't going to be redeemed, and their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. And some of them are going to be downright reprobate, just like today. I mean, how long did it take from Adam's sin before we had some reprobate children in the world? I'd say about the first child in the world.
Yes.
How long did it take after the flood before you had reprobates in the world? Well, the first generation. I mean, it didn't take long at all. So why do you think the millennial would be any different? The millennium. They're going to be reprobates. And they're going to band together, and they're going to chafe under the rule of Christ. They're not going to like it. And they're not going to like us, because we're going to be in the world as a part, in a sense, of the ruling class, because Jesus said we'll rule and reign with him. And we're not going to have a sin nature at all. We're going to be perfect and sinless. I mean, that's, Paul lamented the body of death that he was in Romans 7. Doing things that he knew that he shouldn't do, not doing things that he knew that he should, because of the sin nature in him. Well, we won't have that problem then. We won't have a sin nature.
You mentioned the days of Noah and that. I've wrestled with that thought myself, that at that time, I'm guessing there were just millions of people on the earth, not billions as there are today, maybe. But that not one person on that earth, other than them 8, was a Christian or was saved.
Well, actuality, there are probably billions, really, in actual numbers. I think some people calculate that there are probably billions. But it's not true that they were the only redeemed people on the earth. Hold that thought just a second. Just finish off what we were talking about in Revelation. So when the devil comes out, he's got a whole bunch of people, millions if not billions of people, that are going to be receptive hearts to his lies. They've been chafing under the rule of Christ all that time, and when he sings them a song, they're going to listen.
Yeah.
Certainly depends on how good things are during Trump, they don't care less.
Exactly. Go back to Genesis chapter 5, starting in verse 21. Looking at Enoch here, this is the generations of Adam in chapter 5. Verse 21 says that Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. Methuselah was alive when Noah was building the ark, and then there's Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years. He begat sons and daughters. All the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and it was not, for God took him. So Enoch's gone. But it says that Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. And Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. And Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son. He called his name Noah. Okay. Well, Lamech would have been there too. So it wasn't just Noah and his sons building the ark. Methuselah was there.
Yeah.
Lamech was there.
Yeah.
Who knows how many other hundreds, perhaps, maybe more people were redeemed that were helping him initially building the ark. But we know that Lamech and Methuselah died. I believe Methuselah died the very year. Some people have estimated that he died perhaps within a month or a week or maybe even days of the flood coming. Part of that is prophecy built on the names. I don't remember all the details right now, but the idea with Methuselah is something along the reason he lived to be the oldest recorded person in the Bible is because after he died, judgment was going to come. And so that's why many people believe, and I'm inclined to lean this way, Methuselah died and the flood began very shortly, like within days, if not the next day. So Methuselah obviously was a believer. I know everybody's heard messages. I've even in the past said Noah preached for 120 years and he had no converts. Never says that anywhere in the Bible. It just says that by the time the flood came, Noah and his sons and their wives were the only righteous people on the earth. We don't know when the others died off. They might have died off years before, or they might have died off days before. We know that Methuselah was alive up until the end, and after him came the judgment. And that's what he prophetically meant in his name. So the idea that Moses and a lot to do with the ark, right? Noah and his sons are out there laboring, giant boat, protecting it from arsonists and everything for 120 years with no help, and everybody ridiculing him. No, he had cousins probably, he had uncles, he had his father, his grandfather, and also it says in chapter 6 and verse 9, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generation. Noah walked with God. And so it is talking about his generations, and there's other things involved in that. I think it has to do with his genetic purity. But the idea here is he came from a godly line. He had a godly father. He had a godly grandfather. And he had other godly relatives in his line. And presumably cousins and maybe brothers and different things and nephews and all, who all would have been available to help him, because the devil knew what was going on here with this ark had something to do, God doing something. The devil's trying to stamp out humanity. The idea that for 120 years you had 8 people build the ship and guard it, and nobody was able to set it fire to a wooden ship during that time. I would imagine they tried. Terry Hamilton has a great series of books. I think they're still available. If you contacted Lighthouse Baptist Church there in Ashtabula, they could probably find out. The Methuselah Chronicles, and it's kind of a fictional view of what life was like when the ark was being built and before the ark was built. And he also speculates the same thing in there, that many of these people died protecting the ark. They had that movie that came out some years ago with the whatever they were, the giant whatevers came up and defended the ark. You know, the Nephilim or whatever. It wasn't very biblical. No, it would have been Noah's family, and maybe many of them gave their life defending the ark. We don't know all the details. Yes.
Hey, I want to say about the ark, if you're a veteran, I'm going down Memorial Day to see the ark. You get free, save about $4.
That's a big savings. Yeah, that's a great time to go. Is it just on Veterans Day?
Well,
Or, I mean, Memorial Day?
They do it on Veterans Day, Memorial Day, and certain days, holidays. 'Cause I know there's 2 veterans here.
Yeah, I know you guys are just down there.
You got 3 on 3 on that.
Yeah, so it's, another thing about the ark down there, if you go down there and park, you don't have to pay to go on the ark to go around the ark. You can still go there, you get parked, it costs you some money to park, unless you happen to have a father-in-law that lives in that county and they get free parking because they live in that county. But Kim's dad lives just about 10 minutes from there. But you can actually go and you can go to all the attractions that are outside. And at Christmas time, it's all lit up with lights. It's beautiful. They project on the ark, use the ark as a movie screen. and then project the animation on there, and it's really worth looking at if you're down that way. You don't even have to pay the extra money to go in the ark. You can just enjoy
Not
it.
gonna build one today with the cost of lumber, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
get some gold, it's cheaper.
But backing up on Eric.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem understanding that many of the people that even helped build the ark and all that, all got saved. I'm talking about on that day,
Yeah,
where that door closed.
they were the only saved people in the world at that time.
Do you have a problem with that?
No.
Billions of people on the face of the earth, that none of the other people had faith in God, that were saved.
What uses that parable too, what is that Matthew, where it says, my children are with me in chambers, in the door, you know, a couple of different instances where it talks about there's a cutoff period, you know, when it comes to salvation.
Yeah, but
It just seems odd.
yeah, but in line with what you're saying, in a sense, it would just be that day, because if Methuselah died the day before, then you wouldn't have had that situation on that day. And we don't know how many people died the day before. And it may be, and this is just pure speculation, I can't point to anything in the scripture to base it on necessarily. Maybe the believers of that day understood that their role was to protect the ark for the saving of humanity, because it does seem to indicate that Noah was given knowledge that it would just be him and his family on there. They weren't preparing an ark to take thousands of people.
Right.
So we don't know that. I mean, maybe people understood it. You know, Methuselah may have understood that his name was prophetic, that when he died, judgment was going to come on the world because of the wickedness and the violence. So it may be that other believers in his day understood that just like we know that our role today is to be salt and light, to give a witness up until the time that we either go by death or trumpet sounds and we're caught up. So we know that we're not going to save the world, but we're supposed to reach as many as we can, because we know the world is going to get worse and worse, and the world hates us.
Are you concerned with the idea of all these people being destroyed, or are you thinking that none of them are saved?
None of them were saved. That there were billions of people and only 8. That's the part that I have trouble with, is that only 8 people were saved out of billions who probably had to have heard the word.
Phrase it this way: only 8 were left out of however many were saved beforehand. And the reason I'm phrasing it differently is when you phrase it, only 8 were saved out of the billions, or however many people there were, it sounds like only 8 people got saved. But it may be that thousands, millions got saved, tens of millions, who knows how many. But only 8 were left. Out of all those that got saved, only 8 were left on the day the flood came.
The rest of them were killed by a virus.
There you go. It was the early Wuhan virus.
Well, how many people died building the
And
ark?
no God believers.
You figure there's had to be an industrial accident.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm just looking at it that out of all the people, because we know that shortly before the flood, there was more than 8. We know that by the time the flood came, there were only 8 righteous people left in the world. That's what we know. We don't know how many righteous people were in the world a week before the flood came.
Correct.
Or a month before. Maybe there was 10 million the month before, and 5 million, 3 days before, and 1 million, 2 days before, and 100 the day before, and only 8 on the day up. I mean, that's pretty drastic drop off, because we don't know what was going on. I just, in my mind, I imagined that the devil was doing everything he could to destroy the ark. And, you got a large wooden structure. Well, how would you destroy a large wooden structure?
But it hadn't rained.
Other than demonic
So there were
termites,
probably
but-
people how many thousands of people walked by and laughed and said, what are you building this?
Oh, yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't rain.
But at the same time, the devil would have been inspiring people to go after it, to
Correct.
destroy it. So somehow or another, barring God putting either a force field around it or a ring of angels around it, more likely what he did is he did the same thing that he does today. He calls us to the battle.
Thousands or millions of believers defended.
And actually thinking about what Neil just said, go back to Revelation again where we were just at on that final battle when the devil gets out. Notice something that was there. Out of all of the believers in the world, at the time the devil comes out, go back down to Revelation 20, verse 9. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, okay, that's the entirety of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city. What's the beloved city? That's Jerusalem. This is implying that the believers have all concentrated themselves around Jerusalem. Now, that might be a pretty extensive area. I mean, it might be, let's say it's a 100-mile diameter circle, just for the sake of argument. I mean, I'm sure it could be done, but the fact of the matter is, it looks like all the believers were concentrated around Jerusalem. That's what it sounds like. I mean, because they went out and they compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city. So it's just like all the believers fall back into one position. Maybe that's what happened in the world. All the believers in the world, just like God brought all the animals to the ark that he needed, maybe he put it in the hearts of all the believers. They put it in the heart of all the believers, everybody congregate where the ark is.
It says they went up, maybe they went up on Zion too.
Yeah, well, it's going up elevation wise. Because think of this too, there are going to be massive earthquakes just before, at the end of the tribulation, earthquakes such as the world has never seen. And water comes out from below the throne and it flows down into the Jordan Valley and it heads down to the Dead Sea and brings life. That whole massive, there's going to be like a massive uplift of that whole entire area. And it's going to open up to where it almost looks like there's a rift valley there. You look at the Sinai Peninsula; it's kind of V-shaped. The two gulfs go up there from the Red Sea, and this one's the Gulf of Aqaba over here. If you follow the way the Gulf of Aqaba points, it points right up to the Dead Sea and right up the Jordan Valley. And if you follow it down, they come together, and that same system goes down into Africa, where there's a fault line that runs down through what they call the Horn of Africa, which they say is literally splitting away. So it may be that whole thing goes, that whole area uplifts. And so it may literally be that Mount Zion may be quite a bit higher than what it is right now. Yeah. There's estimates that the Rocky Mountains, for instance, probably formed in a relatively short period of time. Mount Everest, if you look at a cross-section of Mount Everest, you can see it in some pictures. There's a band in there, I think they call it the yellow band or something, and it's full of marine fossils, and it's not too far from the summit of Mount Everest, tallest mountain on Earth. So how did all of those get up there? Apparently, they were a lot lower at one point because there were no tall mountains before the flood. When the flood took place, the fountains of the deep opened up, and the movement of the crust going in different directions pushed on some portions and just pushed together and pushed them up to where you would have had mountains forming literally in hours, minutes, massive upthrust. And so Mount Everest apparently at one time was down below the waters, and it got pushed up to where now you've got marine fossils in a band right below the summit of Mount Everest. So, yeah. So if Mount Zion is lifted up in that process, that could be why they went up because it might be one of the higher points in the area. So, but it does imply though that all the believers are gathered there. So maybe that's what happened at the time of the flood. God put out a call, all the believers gather right here. Yeah.
I'm hoping that the area encamped around about includes Tel Aviv, because I've been to Tel Aviv, and it's a little bit more cosmopolitan than Jerusalem.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, the whole area would experience, I'm sure, a massive uplift because really not all that terribly far from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, is it? We tend to think in terms of our own country, but Israel's considerably smaller than the United States.
I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I went through several times when I was posted in the Sinai for a year, back in 2002, 2003, observing the Treaty of Peace between Israel and Egypt. Flew up the eastern coast of the Sinai several times on mission. And as you go up the eastern coast, you pass a town called Nueva, N-U-A-V-A or N-U-A-V-A sometimes. So, and if you look at a video entitled Exodus Revealed that you can get on Amazon.com, Exodus Revealed, it'll show how that's the crossing point
Right.
between Nueva and Saudi Arabia. We found remains in the coral. The coral reefs are shaped like a junkyard of axles and rods and wheels from ancient Egypt. And they've even detected metal inside the coral, and that just doesn't happen. They don't form like that naturally. And I believe that's the crossing point of where they crossed the Red Sea. And it's just an interesting point.
Yeah, and when you see that from the air, you can see how, you got the area where it's prepared on the Sinai side to go down to the sea, and then on the Saudi side, Saudi Arabia side, to come up out of it. So some of the few places on either coast that you could do that.
I flew over the town of Nueva several times, like I mentioned. And when we went by ground on ground verification missions, I noticed there's a really nice Korean restaurant in Nueva. You got to stop somewhere.
See, when Moses and them were there, it was they didn't have to be kosher back then. They hadn't got the law yet. See, so they all stopped for Korean food before crossing.
47 minutes.
47 minutes from where?
Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I thought it was 45, so I was off.
So that's like driving from here to Massillon.
Yeah, it says it's like 67 miles.
Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry.
Take longer to get to Ashland than to.
Yeah, 47 minutes.
Depends on the horsepower of your chariot.
That's true too. Well, and
Literal horsepower.
Well, and if you look at some of the ways that they wanted to propose two-state solution to further carve up Israel, there were parts of it where Israel would have been less than 10 miles wide.
Yeah.
You would have had the Mediterranean Sea here, and then less than 10 miles over here, the enemy territory. And you're supposed to defend that? A 10-mile wide, or less than 10-mile wide corridor?
That's what President Abomination wanted to do.
And unfortunately, President George H.W. Bush wanted to do that too.
Yeah.
That's why God smashed his house down.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The last four presidents before Trump they were all globalists. Two Republicans and two Democrats. Abomination and Split Willie and the two Bushes.
Yeah.
They're all globalists. One world government people.
Yeah.
I guess it has no brain cells, it's just an administration. I'm sorry, 2 brain cells, maybe one for functions and then.
That's probably a trick of Satan. Oh, we can all just live together as one big happy family and, all the presidents get in there. It sounds wonderful in theory, doesn't it? But the reality is people hate us and, there's nothing gonna change that.
Yeah, well, they hate us because they hated God before they hated us. So if they hated him, they'll hate us. So
Something occurred to me today, in the same way that, when Adam sinned, he died spiritually, but he didn't die physically right away. That when we get saved, we might come to life spiritually, but we're not healed physically right away.
Despite what some people teach.
Yeah. But it's almost symmetrical there.
Yeah.
And of course, it might be until you're resurrected or, get your new body. That's when you're finally healed.
Yeah, that's where you're full.
Which could
Physical
be
healing
before
takes
or
place.
after death.
Yeah.
A couple weeks ago, I asked you about, when Jesus said, you should love your enemies, how it's difficult to do.
Uh-huh.
What do you say to an Israeli? He says, what about your cousins? I asked him about that. What about your cousins? The Arabs.
The Arabs, yeah.
They're our enemies if they're Muslims. If they're Christian Arabs, then we're cousins.
Well,
But if they're
unfortunately,
actively making war against you, how do you love your enemies?
and that is a hard thing. And that's why it's not natural for human beings. Because even some of the Christian Arabs hate the Jews, unfortunately. But yeah, how do you love your enemies? That's not easy. Jesus said, greater love hath no man than he lay down his life for his friends. And we understand that principle, but Jesus laid down his life for his enemies. Because, he's the perfect example of loving your enemies. And it's not, I don't think that's a natural human tendency. I mean, there may be some people who are able, I remember Pope John Paul II forgave and hugged the guy that shot him, tried to assassinate him, who was, by the way, a Muslim. But some people can do that or make a show of that, or somehow maybe they are genuine, but it's not normal. It's not normal for human nature to love your enemy, to love somebody who's trying to kill you or hurt you or destroy you in some fashion. And that's something that I think you can only fully do through the power of God. Because I know my own self, I'm not real favorable toward people I know are trying to hurt me. I don't have a real soft spot for them. I know they just try to destroy my life, but you're just,
We could pray for them though, and that might be a form of love.
yeah.
Yes.
Pray, Lord, that you
God's
take them
eyes.
away quick. No. But, and you do see some things where David did pray stuff like that, and that, like, let them be childless and things. But, and again, that's a human tendency. But to actually love your enemies, I think that takes God to do that. It really does. Because that's, in a sense, God's grace is where he loved his enemies.
And it's described so beautifully in the Bible. Love is patient, kind, demands its own. You can understand real love better
Yeah.
when you read that scripture rather than thinking of a romantic.
Mm-hmm.
You might get caught up in a romantic type of
Yeah.
human love.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some
Empathetic,
nuance.
empathy.
I think there's some nuance in that, though. I mean,
There's different types of love, yeah.
well, I mean, yes, we're to love our enemies, but we're not to let them walk over us.
Oh, no,
Don't let us
that's,
walk over enemies.
that's not saying that you're gonna let them walk all over you. Zeke, you want to say something?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you had something.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you said love your enemies. There's nothing wrong with defending yourself.
No, that ties in with what you say too, yeah. It never says, like you said, you love your enemies and let them walk all over you. You can love your enemy and defend them, it's the idea, don't make me have to shoot you type of thing. You step over my threshold and threaten my family, I'm going to shoot. You stay out there, I'm not gonna pursue you.
The warning
But,
is loving them.
Yeah, but I'm called not to love, or I'm called not to hate my enemy, but I'm called to love my family.
Yeah.
I love my family more than I love my enemy. So
you give the
there's
enemy the
levels.
warning.
Wasn't it G.K. Chesterton who said the true soldier fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him?
Exactly. And that's that statement, the true soldier, fights because he loves what's behind him, not in front of him. is a perfect picture of the difference between the Israelis and the Arabs over in the Middle East. The Israeli soldier is defending the men, women, and children behind him. The Hamas or Hezbollah or whatever Muslim soldier is standing behind the men, women, and children, shooting.
Isn't Mark McCloskey the guy who defended his property?
Oh, in St. Louis?
Yeah, is he running for Senate? People all over the state said, hey, you gotta run, and he's running.
Oh, okay, I hadn't heard that. I know the Soros-funded prosecutor that was trying to go after him illegally is, I guess, lost her license and they're doing a recall on her or something.
Any updates on Rittenhouse? Has anyone heard anything?
No, I haven't heard anything more there. Martin, you were gonna say something, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, loving your enemies. I think Romans 13, I think it's chapter 10, a better way of saying something and really realizing what that statement means is love works no ill to your neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law.
Uh-huh. It was, yeah. Now, the way Jesus said it too was in Matthew 5:44, but I say to you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, and do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain upon the just and on the unjust. And this does go back to that idea too. Do these things that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, because you're going to show a godly attitude by doing this, rather than saying, I can't stand them. I can't wait for the opportunity to mow them down.
You know, when I thought of that too, I don't remember how long back that was, but it's a lot easier to do after you start doing it, because you realize how terrible you feel after you do, you know, say something nasty to somebody, and then you're sorry you did, and the next day, if you really don't turn around and love them instead of start building a root of bitterness against them, you just eat yourself up after a while.
That is true.
You do more harm to yourself than you
Yeah.
do to hating them.
Yeah.
Isn't
But
there a
that's the
verse,
way it works.
a verse that says when you're praying for them and all, you're actually heaping hot coals on their
You're
head?
in Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 17.
Right.
Recompense to no man evil for evil. In other words, you don't have to get down on his level. Provide all our things honest in the sight of all men. Then he says in verse 18, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. We're supposed to be peacemakers, right? We're not supposed to be quick to anger. We're supposed to try and calm the situation down, try to have the right attitude. And it's not always going to happen, because he says, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Then in Romans 12, verse 19, he says, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And then this is what you're talking about. It says, therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. And then verse 21, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good.
What verse was?
That's Romans chapter 12, verses 17 through 21.
All right, thank you.
And even under the law, if your enemy's ox is in the ditch and you come along, you're supposed to help him. You're not supposed to stand there and gloat and say, boy, you're going to lose the ox over this one for sure, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. Yes.
Did you happen to hear on the radio today that tomorrow at 3 o'clock at the Lincoln Memorial, there's gonna be a national march for Palestine. So apparently, from 3 to 8 PM tomorrow at the Lincoln Memorial, apparently the Biden administration okayed it. And it's definitely talking about Israel being the aggressor.
Oh, yeah.
Fighting. So it's gonna be a huge rally for all these pro-Palestinian people.
And these things have been happening all over. He's got a picture that sums up the difference between the Israelis and the Arabs there. Yes.
They say in New York, the Jews are coming under very heavy attack from the Muslims.
Anti-Semitism is increasing in this country at a rapid rate. It's just not being reported.
No, fake news.
And over in Israel right now, anti-Jewish activities are at an all-time high. They're saying it's the worst pogroms, which is efforts to attack and harass the Jews, since Nazi Germany. So it's the worst violence that they've seen since the founding of Jerusalem as well. It's after 9, so let's go ahead and pray. And so if you have to get out of here, that's fine. And if you don't have to get out of here, you want to stand around and talk for a while, that's fine too. Let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you again for a good fellowship, a good conversation here this evening, and the different things we were able to talk about from your word. Lord, something we certainly speculate on, and something we make hopefully informed guesswork over, but at the same time, there's also some things that we do know for certain. And so again, we just pray that you would just guide us, help us, Lord, to be able to understand your word better, be able to explain it to those around us that have questions, Lord, so that we can be a better witness, a better testimony. And Lord, help us to be able to apply those things in our lives that we look at in the scriptures. Father, again, watch over us, keep us safe on the roads as we head out of here this evening. Bless the day tomorrow, especially bless the day on Sunday for your glory. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. And remember, next week we're going to be in the room out there. So,
we walk in?
Yeah.
Oh,
They eat breakfast in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
So,
We have to wear our Halloween masks?
no. And, yeah, that's after the second, yeah. So,
okay.
masks are on. I walked in today, the owner of the place was standing there with no mask on. So,
Okay, that's a good thing.
I think if the owner's standing out there with no mask on, that's good enough for me. So,
I like to see the politician.
oh, I saw this one, yeah, I saw this one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I saw this. Yeah. Guy, what? Oh, okay. Everybody, but did he? Yeah, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Well, I would have somebody come that line and says, "Oh, that's something else that in you that'll offset."
This one wasn't really too well.
You know, but you see where they think that be something that gets everybody going to out back again. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah, actually, I got it backed off about 98% of the way.
There'll be a lot less people on the road. But, you know, and it's not,
You know why?
Even if you were to accept that everything is fine with the vaccine, with all the good intentions, it is not as safe as other vaccines.
It's in
All those animals that they tested on the vaccine, they're all dying.
One more step in Toledo. Let them bring Toledo again.
But I'm telling you what, they did so much, and they're still doing. There's these great guys that right now are in the hand of the globalists, and we're seeing some things happening in the so-called Free West that we never would have thought before. The closing of churches and the arrest of pastors for
free countries.
To the extent that they are now.
Did they even say that at the beginning of the rise of the Roman Empire?
I just think the human race.
Exactly, we're reaching that point where so many people are just I saw a picture had like this one great quiet. Sounds she speaks.
They don't have. I might just end up getting a caliber.
And that's about what it is. But I think it's ironic that Unit Gates the problem with his wife that somebody, I just wonder who it could be, is putting out all kinds of information about Gates' connections to everything.
He had something in a underground cavern dug or something. Who knows?
Jojo, come pick it up.
Well, all I know is God is still on the throne.
We'll find, maybe we'll find it all out when we're in glory.
Yeah.
Oh, well, God bless you. I'll see you next.
All right, you take care of that. See ya.
You know, Jesus was saying, well, I can't remember which gospel it was, that he's gonna have to return, but no flesh will be saved.
Well, that was, he's saying that in Matthew, where he was talking about during the tribulation, that as bad as things are now, they're gonna get worse during the tribulation. And by the midpoint of the tribulation, it's going to be so bad that he says, except those days were short, meaning if they went on longer than 3.5 years, there wouldn't be anybody left.
Yeah, I just wonder if they've been thinking that these maniacs like Bill Gates wants to wipe out 95% of the world's population. They had them in mind, you know? I mean, that's a strange, this is a strange phenomenon. I've never seen anything like it. Somebody wants to wipe out 95% of the world's population.
January, a year ago, we were talking about the plagues of locusts.
Yeah.
Well, now there's some place over in Australia. No, it's Australia. They have a plague of mice.
Oh, yes.
They don't know where they are from. They're just overrun with mice. It's like a sea of brown sea surging of mice.
Wow, that's right.
We're talking about the mouse problem in Australia.
Yeah.
Did you hear that PETA activists are protesting? They were protesting outside the cities. You know, in the cities begging the people in the cities not to kill the mice.
But that's just, they don't know where to go. And understand population dynamics. Sometimes everything comes together just right here. Sure. But still, I mean, this you would have thought they would have seen some advanced notice of it. It's just like one of the pictures of the private population.
Well, there's people that care more about welfare of dogs and cats than they do human beings. It's okay to murder millions of babies in the world, but God forbid that we hurt a little fire. You see these ads from the ASPCA, you know? Man, we shouldn't abuse animals. They don't have a problem of abortion, obviously, most of these people are killing the unborn, but most, no, you can't hurt dogs and cats and kittens.
Well, and that's where animal rights support the
All right. Well, take care. We're gonna sign off on here. Thanks for joining us.
Don't just shove it.